So welcome everybody to this first Macklin's Take YouTube episode with me, Andy Clark and Matt Macklin. It's something we've been talking about for a little while, and we decided that this week was as good a week to just dive straight into it. We've been having discussions about new microphones and laptops for Macklin and all sorts of tech inquiries, but they haven't moved very quickly. You know, you won't be surprised to know that. So we decided we'll just get cracking this week. I'll just explain quickly what this is. So this is separate to the podcast. The podcast won't be affected at all. That will still come out on Tuesdays, as it always has, available in all the normal places. And it will migrate bit by bit to the YouTube channel. Our tech guru, Darren Reese, has been drip feeding in excerpts from old podcasts, which of course have been filmed on Zoom, onto the YouTube channel, just to make sure there's plenty of content there. And that's what will happen over the course of the few weeks, months, as we put out more podcasts. You will see them on the YouTube channel. What this episode is, though, it will be about 20 minutes every week, and it'll come out on a Thursday. And we will be talking about things that are in the boxing news, because we don't really do that necessarily in the podcast. We pick out topics and themes and get into it that way. But with this, we'll be just pulling on a few strands of things that have happened during the week, things that have really caught our eye. So not necessarily reviewing cards and previewing cards, although we will do some of that. More it'll be, as I say, just casting our eye around and seeing what kind of subjects are out there, the kinds of things that we would probably do in the podcast, but subjects that wouldn't necessarily stand up under an hour's worth of discussion. So that's really what we're looking at. I'm in Forest Gate, East London. Macklin is in his God-fearing location in the corner of the chapel. In Solihull as always. Matt, how are things? How are you?
Good. I'm not bad. I'm not bad. I've just been confessing my sins. It took me a long time, but I'm ready to go.
Excellent. Okay, so the first thing, something that really kind of jumped out at me over the course of the last few days, really, is Daniel Dubois deciding to split from Martin Bowers as his trainer. Martin Bowers, who's trained him all the way through since he turned pro, will still be his manager, but he'll no longer be his trainer. And this comes off the back of the defeat against Joe Joyce, which was a huge setback for Dubois. Not fatal by any means, because he's that young that he can come back, but he's going to go with Mark Tibbs and Jimmy Tibbs. I've just been watching a video from Queensbury on their YouTube channel that came out this morning saying exactly that. These situations are always interesting, because it can quite often be the case that when a fighter who's had everything his own way, that's maybe a bit unfair because Dubois performed really, really well, but everything had gone his way, let's put it that way, previously, they lose. And quite often, the first thing that happens is that the trainer goes. I didn't really expect this, if I'm honest. How about you?
Yeah, it kind of came out the blue a little bit, although I suppose thinking about it, I'm not shocked, because quite often when something, I changed trainers several times in my career. Sometimes it might appear, oh, all of a sudden he's lost and he's looking for someone to blame, and now he's trying to make a change. And of course, the trainer is the first sort of port of call if you're looking for a scapegoat. Or, although that's not always the case, it could be a case that things were, maybe there were cracks there anyway, but you just plow on because it's the next fight. It's, it's not broke, don't fix it mentality. And, or it might be on your mind, but then you're coming up to the fight and then you win the fight and you're buzzing and you're kind of celebrating for a couple of weeks. And then all of a sudden you're back in the gym and you've got another day and you haven't really addressed it. And you don't really address it then until a loss comes. And, all of a sudden then you're analyzing everything with a real fine-tooth comb, and you're looking to think, well, right, we need to make changes. In respect to this one, in this change, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because I'm just thinking back to the fight. There were periods when, his cornerman Bowers was saying to him, come on, Daniel, this is the fight game. You could see there was obviously he was reading his body language, and there was distress signals there. Now, there's a couple of ways you can look at that. There is a point in a fight where you can feel sorry for yourself. I mean, I think it's fair to say, and I'm not giving myself a pat on the back here. I was a brave fighter. That was probably one of my trademarks. But I remember being in a fight against Ruben Varane where I thought it was going to be an easy fight, really. And all of a sudden, I mean, the fifth round, I should have pulled out of the fight. I was ill, had a chest infection, but I went ahead with it because I thought I'd have him out of there in a few rounds. All of a sudden, I'm in round 5 or 6. I can't remember which it was. And, this eye's closing up. That one's cut. I've been out to the body. And I'm feeling sorry for myself. And I'm thinking, oh, I should have pulled out. This is what's going on in my head. And I remember then thinking to myself, you need to snap out of this. You got 6 rounds to go. You need to dig in here and tough this one out. Now that was me having an internal conversation, but it was similar to what I think can go on with the cornerman and the fighter. And I think, Martin Bowers was saying to him, son, this is the fight game. It's getting tough in there. You could see that maybe Daniel Dubois was probably coming over him a little bit. Now, the other, because of what we know happened in the fight, and because we know now the injury that he was dealing with, and we can only imagine the kind of pain that was, you could say that wasn't the time for the corner to be giving him the tough love. That wasn't the time for him to be saying, come on, son, this is the fight game. You got to dig in. Now we can say, with the benefit of hindsight, maybe Martin Bowers should have pulled him out and taken that, instead of leaving him in there to have to kind of take himself out, where he took the knee, felt this excruciating pain, knew something was not right. It wasn't that he bottled it in a hard fight because it got hard. It was because he thought, whoa, this isn't normal, this level of pain. I've done, something's not right here. And he's took himself out of the equation. Now we can all be experts with the benefit of hindsight, saying, oh, he should have known his fighter. The distress signals were there. He should have pulled him out. But like I said, like I gave the example of myself in that fight when I was feeling sorry for myself and I snapped out of it. These are fine margins. They're fine margins in there, and it's a judgment call. And I think that's why, I don't want to drift off on a tangent, which I'm famous for, but that's why I think it's I think fighters who generally have one trainer and stay with the one trainer, they have a really successful run because they get to know each other. A coach knows boxing, but then he's got to know his fighter. He's got to know what he's good at, what he's bad at. He's got to know that they're thinking along the same lines. I remember, Billy Graham like Ricky Hatton. I don't know if Billy Graham was the right trainer for me, but I don't think anyone in the world could have trained Ricky Hatton better than Billy Graham, because they were together from a young age, and Billy molded him, and he was perfect for him, and he knew him on every level, physical, mental, emotional. If Ricky was struggling, Billy would have known, and he would have known to what level. He wouldn't even have to have asked him. Do you know what I mean? And so I don't know the level of Martin Bowers and Dubois' relationship, or, should he have read that there wasn't something right, or, so instead of giving him the tough, come on, son, this is the fight game, should he have pulled him out? I don't know.
Yeah, I think from reading and listening to things that they've both said, I think maybe there were some cracks prior to that. And I think that Dubois, he does kind of hint that he doesn't really feel that the injury was addressed necessarily during the course of the fight, and that maybe that decision, he could have been given a bit more help with that. And what I've read from Martin Bowers in a Boxing Scene interview, I think it was basically that with regard to the fight, Dubois didn't really do the things that they'd worked on. They'd worked on taking away the jab, and he didn't really do that. So you could see that there were differences there in the aftermath of it. It's just very interesting, isn't it? He's going with the Tibbs now, and that makes sense because he'll know them from the Peacock. And Jimmy's very experienced. Obviously, Mark will be taking the lead, and he did a lot of good work with Dillian White. So it's bold, isn't it? It's bold for a young fighter to do this.
Yeah, it is. And I don't interrupt you there, and I don't want to keep going back on things. I know we've got to keep moving forward with the conversation. But Martin Bowers saying he didn't do the things we worked on. Maybe he wasn't able to do the things you worked on because of Joe Joyce. So instead of getting frustrated and just saying the same thing to him, maybe you got to try something new. That's why game plans are great, but they might not go to plan because the other guy's got a say in this as well. There's two of us in there, and if everything we've worked on, he's got an answer for it, or it's not coming up, or I can see it but I can't do it. Then you have to adjust and adapt. And maybe, Mike Bowers, I can't remember all the instructions he was saying to him, but if he kept saying the same things to him and it wasn't working, stop saying, obviously it's not working. Obviously I can't do it. You have to, now the trainer has to adjust and adapt. He has to think of a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, whatever. You got to keep adjusting and adapting. So, I think there's been a breakdown of communication there. Maybe Dubois wasn't happy with the advice he got, whatever. But like you say, I think we can talk about that all day. And the reality is we're guessing because we don't know the ins and outs. But moving on from that, I think Mark Tibbs is probably the logical choice. I think it's important for a fighter to be happy in his surroundings. I was someone that went on the road training a lot. So, boxing's hard enough. But when you're kind of low, when you're in a strange city, you don't know anybody and you're on your jack, and let me tell you, you have a bad spar, a lot of negative thinking can happen after that. And, you can feel lonely. And all of a sudden, boxing, which is hard enough anyway, becomes even harder. You're putting even more hardship on yourself. So I think that Mark Tibbs is an experienced coach. He's experienced training heavyweights and with the current crop. He's been through that current crop. He's been involved in big fights with Dillian White. He's prepared for fights, all those fights. So he's very current as well with the heavyweight division. So I think and he's local. He doesn't have to up sticks and move to another country. So I think it's a good choice.
Interestingly, another fighter who lost for the first time was John Dockerty against Jack Cullen recently, and he's now split with Tony Sims. He's managed by Al Siesta these days, the Doc, and he's going up to Sheffield to be trained by Grant Smith. We won't discuss that one, but it just caught my eye. It's along a similar kind of theme. Mm. So to move on to something that is very much related, another fighter who lost for the first time last year was Deontay Wilder. It took a long time for it to happen, but he lost for the first time against Tyson Fury in the rematch. We know what happened. We don't need to go into that in any detail. We also know what happened in the fallout and the outlandish reasons, explanations he gave for the defeat. I kind of understand that because you lose for the first time, you've got to try and find something to explain it, although it did get a bit ridiculous. I think it's fair to say. Mark Breland copped a lot of flack from Team Wilder. They removed him, and he had his say for the first time last week. Big credit here to Spencer Fear and Tunde Ajayi for getting him on their podcast, The Fight Is Right, and he outlined things that were going on behind the scenes when he was a member of the team that he wasn't happy with, and basically alluded to the fact that he never felt that Wilder trained properly. People on Twitter have turned that around on him and said, well, but you were his trainer. It's just interesting to see these things that come out afterwards, isn't it? Because Wilder's then retorted again and kind of disparaged Breland a bit further. We're neither Team Breland nor Team Wilder here, but we would both agree that he stopped the fight at the right time. We would both agree that the things that Wilder has come out and said since don't really make any sense. You don't really want to see this. It's all a bit low rent, to be honest, if they're just going to take cracks at each other all the time. But Mark Breland had to say something, didn't he? Or some people might have thought that what Wilder was saying was true.
Yeah, look, no one wants to see people airing their dirty laundry in public. You want to keep that stuff internal. But when they've made Mark Breland the scapegoat, Team Wilder, what can Mark do? He's got and do you know what? In fairness, he said nothing for a long time. Really, he didn't like make a statement and come out with it. But credit to Tunde and Spencer, they got it out of him. And he's on the chat, and he's talking, it's come up, and he's thought, why wouldn't he defend himself? Mark Breland's a good guy. I don't know Mark that well, but I know him, and I know people who know him, and he's a real decent fella, and you could see even in the fact that he stopped that fight. He's not really the chief second in that team. Wilder's other trainer was, I can't think of his name. I've had an absolute memory blank.
Jay Diaz
was the man calling the shots, really, and I suppose Mark Breland was overseeing. In terms of before, people say, well, no one was saying this beforehand. Nobody says anything beforehand because you don't want to show any weakness. Best camp I've ever had. Listen, I bruised my rib 3 weeks out fighting Sergio Martinez, split all my knuckles a couple of days later. But on the week of the fight, I'm telling everyone it's the best shape I've been in and nothing could be better because I'm trying to convince myself as much as I'm trying to convince, and I definitely don't want anyone in Sergio Martinez's camp picking up on a hint of weakness. So boxers and teams will always say that everything went great. No one's ever going to come out and go give a foreclosure and say, "Oh, listen, by the way, I'm injured. I'm not that fit. I don't really fancy you." Do you know what I mean? You got to understand this. So, but and actually, Mark Breland, I don't think there's a sour grapes thing there from Mark Breland. I just think he's defending his character. This is a man that stood up. He wasn't the number one chief second, yet he jumped up on the ring. He stopped the fight. That was the absolute right thing to do. And in my opinion, Deontay Wilder should be thanking him and be grateful for it. And if anything, he would be getting promoted to number one chief second. That really, Mark Breland's a very quiet person. It's unlike him really to come out speaking. So I'd say it must have hit a nerve with him, and maybe he got fed up with it. As you'd expect, someone attacking your character. So no, I mean, yeah, it's not good to see, but it's out there now, and we're going to discuss it. We're going to talk about it because that's the way it is.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, it's a really interesting situation, and as you say, he was under fire and he kept his counsel for a long time. But at some point, he was going to say something. He had to say something, and he said it. And Wilder's come back, and they need to try and wrap that up now. Just put a bow on it and move on, because I really want to see Wilder back in the ring. I think he's been great for the heavyweight division. It'll be fascinating to see if he can recover from this or not. But I really want to see him back. But moving on to...
And I do too, by the way, Andy. I've done a couple of his fights when he died. I've done the Brazil one, and I did the one with Luis Ortiz. And, in terms of excitement, yeah, there's loads of fundamental technical, things that aren't great. But he's just got absolute dynamite in that right hand. I mean, it's dynamite. So you want someone like that in the heavyweight division?
You do. Absolutely, you do. So final thing for this first episode. We've got Josh Warrington coming up at the weekend. He's up against Maurizio Lara. Warrington's been out of the ring for a long time, October 2019. And he's in a really interesting situation because he's given up that IBF featherweight belt, which he won against Lee Selby, defended against Cole Frampton, tough mandatory against Kid Galahad, a slightly softer one, a voluntary against Sofiane Takoucht, which he very much earned. But that was very hard earned, that title. And what he was hoping was that in 2020, there would be unifications. He would fight in Vegas. At that point, there was Gary Russell. There was still Oscar Valdez, Santa Cruz as well. He was still there in that division. And it was a glittering division. And those fights were lined up for him. They were there. They were going to happen. Then COVID happens. And he's been a big loser from that. And it's really interesting that he's chosen to give up that IBF belt because he didn't want another mandatory with Galahad. It's not the kind of fight that he wants at this stage of his career, because this is a risk. People give up belts, don't they? But generally, when they've got more than one and they've had a mandatory put on them that they don't want. But to give up, I mean, that must have really hurt. I've been reading an article with him in Boxing News just now, and it must have really stung to have to give up that belt. But he just felt he had no choice. I mean, what have you made of that? Because he's rolling the dice here. He's talking about getting those fights with Kanju and Gary Russell anyway, and I really hope it happens. But technically speaking, he brings less to the table now than he did before.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting one because it really is a judgment call. And whatever way you look at it, it's a bit of a gamble because, as you said, the Leo Santa Cruz fight was there. This fight was there. Now they're not. Things change all the time. COVID, who knew that was going to happen? So, Brian Peters always used to say to me, bird in the hand is better than two in the bush. You know what I mean? And because you don't know what's going to happen, especially in boxing. And, for example, now COVID, there's no crowd. Josh Warrington brings massive crowd. So there's a lot of revenue into the pot under normal circumstances. With COVID, that's not the case. He's not selling 40, 50,000 people stadium, or whatever he sells. So, all of a sudden, Josh Warrington's a tough night's work. This is a guy who's got a good chin, who literally goes bell to bell. Galahad can bang, Frampton can bang. They didn't really knock a stir out of him. He kept that pressure on them. So you've got to think to yourself, oh, this is going to be 12 rounds where I'm going to absolutely have to go to the well because there's no quit in this guy. You don't want to fight people like that unless you have to, really. You know, and he hasn't got a title now, so what's he bringing to the table with me? He's not bringing 50,000 people of a crowd, bringing that revenue now. So he's a tough fight, really. Doesn't have a title. What am I gaining from it? You know, I'm just thinking out loud as how I would think. But then it's like, you know, he gives up the title. And, you know, this is probably a wider conversation, but the IBF, you know, in some ways you've got to admire the way they push their mandatories. You know, if you get yourself into a position to be mandatory with the IBF, you are going to get your title shot. You are going to get it. So in some ways you have to admire the IBF more than any of them, because they do it. They're unrelenting and they do it. But then you've got the other thought process is, well, look, you've got to learn to play the game a little bit and work with the promoters. And there are big fights and there are mega fights and unifications, and some things don't make sense. And, you know, do you know what I mean? There's that thought. But I think the problem with that is people take the piss. You know, people take the piss. So I think you could argue that maybe the IBF are a little bit too stringent and need to kind of play ball a bit more. But then where does that end? Because then when the ones that do play ball, it's like, you know, you're a mandatory challenge. Look at Dillian White. How long was he mandatory? And he didn't get a shot. You know, that wouldn't happen with the IBF. So, you know, you can make a strong argument either way. It's a discussion that could go on for a lot longer than what we've got here. But yeah, it is a gamble for Warrington. But, you know, he's 30. I think he's 30, you know, he's undefeated. You know, you've got to admire him, the way he's gone back to back with Selby, Frampton, Galahad. You know, that's, like you say, he was definitely, you couldn't begrudge him an easier defense. If anyone deserved an easier defense, it was Josh Warrington. But I'm looking forward to seeing him back in the ring, and just can't wait for boxing to be back.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I do think he's just been really unlucky, because no one's really benefited from the COVID crisis in boxing. I think that's a massive understatement, but I do like the way the IBF do it, but I do completely understand that he didn't want to fight Galahad again, and he felt that he was backed into a corner. And the idea is that he beats Lara on Saturday, which he should. And then in late April, they're looking at someone like Kanju or Gary Russell. Russell has been even talking about stepping up to lightweight to get in the mix with that division, which is now probably the most attractive division in world boxing. I mean, I don't really see Warrington having too many problems with Lara, but it's an awkward situation in itself, because if you're ever going to be tempted to look beyond the fight, and he's not the kind of person who would, but if that's ever going to happen, it's going to happen with this kind of fight, isn't it? Because he will almost be thinking, I mean, it might almost be in your head, I don't just need to win, I need to make sure I win and I don't get cut, or this doesn't happen, or that doesn't happen. It's a bastard tricky situation for him.
I know you can't deny that it's a potential banana skin. You know, it's got banana skin written all over it. That said, I don't think that it'll go disastrous for Josh. I think he'll just be too good. But you know, Josh is someone that feeds off the crowd. He feeds off the energy. He's the tenacity, the volume, the pace. He's not someone that can necessarily steady his opponent with his power, because he's not really a big puncher. He's a volume puncher, and he only has to be a few percent not up for it as normal. And you know, all of a sudden this kid fancies it and digs in and starts having a bit of success. And, you know, it can become a hard fight. It can become what should have been a routine, stay busy fight can become a hard fight. I used to hate those stay busy fights, you know, because I think you wonder what happens is most of the time you underperform. You come down a few levels and they come up a few levels because it's a big opportunity. And what should have been an easy fight becomes a competitive hard fight. And then you end up winning, but feeling like you're gutted. You feel like you lost because you performed badly. So, you know, that's the worry. But I think whatever happens, he'll win. But I think he's, you know, it'd be with the time out and that he'll be really eager to not just win. He'll be dying to win and look good and get everyone talking about him.
Yeah, that's it. That's the mission. That is the mission. So we'll wrap this up there, about 24-25 minutes. That's what we're kind of aiming for on these. We're just trying to spin from subject to subject. Some other good fights on that card though. Zelfa Barrett against Kiko Martinez, that's a good bit of matchmaking, I think. vacant featherweight British title on the line between Lee Wood and Reece Mould. Reece Mould, who's a stablemate of Warrington's, also trained by Sean O'Hagan. That's another good fight too. And boxing's back because the weekend after we got another card, and then after that it rolls into Frampton against Herring. Then after that it's Dillian White, and things are very much back in the land of the living, which is great. So that's it for our first YouTube episode. As I said, these will come every Thursday, and they'll be pretty much like they have been today. Sometimes we'll have some more subjects, and it'll be more rapid fire. Other times, maybe there won't be too much around, and we'll just give one particular subject a little bit more time. There will definitely be things that you feel like we should have picked out and talked about, and we haven't. But that's just the way it goes. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. If you could subscribe to the channel, that would be great. And we'll catch you again next time.